Welcome to the Live Like It's True podcast, where we look at some of the most interesting and surprising stories of the Bible and ask, how can we live like this story is true? I'm Shannon Popkin. I'm an author, a speaker, and Bible teacher. And here on the podcast, I'm inviting you to drink deeply of the true story of the Bible and live like it's true. I'm so excited to tell you about 2 books I have launching this spring, and I'll be hosting a podcast series to go with each. In the Sarah series, we'll look at the life of Sarah, found in Genesis 12 through 21, which is the topic of my new Bible study with Our Daily Bread titled Shaped by God's Promises, Lessons from Sarah on Fear and Faith. I love this story of the Bible, and I can't wait to dive in with you both on the pages of this book and then here on the podcast. My second book launching is Comparison Girl for Teens, published by Kriegel and co-authored with my dear friend Lee Nienhuis. We poured our hearts into this fun-filled, truth-packed resource that we know is going to help so many teens find freedom from comparison. So here on the podcast, we'll be doing the comparison series, and we'll look at how Jesus compared in a completely different way. I hope that each one of these conversations will inspire you to better know the story, share the story, and live like the story is true. In these early episodes of the Sarah series, I'm talking with 4 women whose stories were highlighted in my new Bible study, Shaped by God's Promises. I'll be weaving thoughts from throughout Sarah's story, found in Genesis 12 through 21, into these conversations. And then later on in the series, we'll return to our more typical format and talk through Sarah's story scene by scene. I just know you're going to want to hear each one of these conversations with Bible teachers Courtney Doctor, Ann Swindell, Carol Kent, and others. Today is part 2 of a conversation I got to have with Sana Latrease. The first episode was called From Trafficked to Triumph, One Woman's Faith Story. We asked the question, where was God when this little girl was being trafficked by the mother who should have kept her safe? Sana has such an amazing faith-filled perspective. I don't want you to miss that episode. But today we're picking it up with part 2, and we're going to talk about a more recent story from Sana's life. So let's jump into that conversation with Sana Latrease. Sana Latrease, welcome back to Live Like It's True.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Sana, would you give us a quick snapshot of how God's using you, what you're involved in right now, what your ministry is?
Absolutely. So I have a nonprofit organization. It's called Unashamed, Inc. And we specifically work with youth that are currently in the foster care system. We work with teen mothers, and we also work with families of incarcerated parents. So all of those different groups are people that connect with my own personal story. So we do a lot of initiatives to really help them, provide resources and support. And then I am currently in the process of learning how to co-train incoming foster parents. So I'm excited to be able to do that.
That's like full circle for you.
Completely full circle. Everyone will know it was God.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for serving Him. And tell us about your book.
Oh, so my book is called Everyone Will Know It Was God.
Okay.
And it is just a little bit of my life story. And so I'm really proud of it. I'm in the process of starting book number 2. So keep me in prayer.
So good. And is the story of your son in this book then?
Yes. Book number 2 will be the story of my son.
Okay. So it's not in the first one.
No, it's not in the first one.
Wow. Well, you have such a rich story. I mean, we had a full episode before, and it was packed with all of these examples of God being faithful and you putting your hope in Him. But that was just the beginning of the story.
Absolutely. It was just the beginning.
So let's go forward a little bit to just a couple of years ago. You are a mom. Mm-hmm. This son was born at what age?
19.
You were a teenage mom and a single mom for quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And so I imagine you and him were really close. or are really close.
Yes, absolutely grown together. There were those years of Just he and I. Just he and I. You know, it's very interesting because I started 2021 January finding finally my birth father. So, you know, I come into literally on the last day of 2020, December 31st, I get the text message, we've located your family. January 1st, I speak to all of my family for the first time ever. I came into 2021 feeling like this is it. This is the promise.
Mm.
We're done.
Promised land. Like,
Yeah, like life is good. There's no more story to tell. You know, wrap this thing up with a bow. We're done. And I literally said that out of my mouth. I said to God, you know, well, thanks. What now? You know, and just 6 months after that, on June 22nd, I started my day normal. I went to work. So I go to work, normal day, leave from work, tell my boss, see you tomorrow, to the principal, and I leave. About a little before 6 o'clock, my son, who at the time was 18 years old, he leaves for work. He didn't have a driver's license, so normally my husband or I would drive him to work. And so this particular day, he came into my room. He said, Mom, I'm about to leave. My friend's outside. He's going to bring me to work. And I said, well, daddy's going to bring you. And he's like, no, my friend will bring me, which was not uncommon. His friend has brought him to work before, so it wasn't a big thing. And so I said, all right, I'll see you later. I proceeded to get in the bed, and I'm laying in the bed, and then probably about 6:55, I get this news alert on my phone, and it says there was a car accident, Route 9 in Middletown, which is literally behind my house, not even a mile from my house. And I remember in my gut, I felt like my son was in that car accident, but I brushed it off. And probably about an hour and a half after that, my husband is we're both in the bed. He's asleep because he works third shift. So he's asleep, getting ready to go in at 11. And I'm just watching TV, and I hear this loud bang on the door. And so my daughter gets up and she looks through the peephole, and she says, Mom, it's the police. So I'm like, what? Open the door. And so I'm running out, you know, putting clothes on. I run outside, run out the door, and it's the police, and they're saying, are you the parent of Jameer? And I said, yes. My husband comes out the room, and it's just like, it felt like craziness. Like I couldn't hear anything. Like, and I just looked at the officer, and I said, it's the car accident, isn't it? Was my son in the car accident? And he said, yes. And I said, is he alive? And he said, I can't tell you that. And I just started screaming, like, you have to tell me, is he alive? Is he alive? And he said, I can't tell you that. You're going to have to go to the hospital. And he, you know, told us what hospital, and we get in the car. And I remember I started driving. My husband's like, pull over, let me drive. And so he began to drive, and we drove to the hospital. And, you know, I guess I called family on the way. I don't even remember what the drive to the hospital was. I just kept screaming, God, please save my baby. Please save my baby. And we get to the hospital. They bring us into a room. And the doctor's like, your son is alive for now. That's what she said. And I just remember saying, thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. And so they went on to let us know he was in surgery. He had been rushed into surgery because he had ruptured his aortic valve in his heart, and it would be a few hours. And so about 3 hours later, he finally came out of surgery. By that time, so much family had flooded the hospital, his friends, everyone. And the nurse says, you can go up to the ICU and see him. I remember walking in the room, and he just looked like he was asleep. He was on a ventilator. They had him completely covered with a blanket up to his neck, and he had no scratches on his face, not one scratch. And when I was just kissing his forehead, but when I looked up, I saw a couple of the nurses standing on the other side of the room against the wall, and they had their head down. And in that moment, the Lord said they were preparing him for death, as if that would be my last time seeing him alive. And I said in that moment, God, if you've allowed him to live to this point, he is not going to die. And so for the next 43 days, Shannon, my son was in a coma. He endured 14 surgeries within the first 2 weeks of the coma. Everything from ruptured spleen to punctured lungs to the aortic valve, crushed pelvis that had to be completely rebuilt, spinal injury. He had a traumatic brain injury. I mean, anything that you could think of, he had it. But when I tell you, throughout those 43 days, the Lord performed miracle after miracle. And I had begun from the very first day sharing the story on my social media.
I was following along, girl. I was praying. I was sharing his pictures. And watching videos that you would share of him, like pictures of him. He's such a sweet boy.
He is. He really is.
I fell in love with Jameer.
Oh, and it was so necessary because I remember one of my aunts called me and she said, you need to stop sharing on social media what's happening with Jameer. And I said to her, if I don't share, how will they know God? I can't just tell you my son was in a car accident and then tell you, oh, he's all better now. No, you have to know the process because it's the process that's going to make you believe in God.
It's that stretch between the parentheses.
Yes.
Right? It's those 43 days
it's the 43
of the
days.
coma and more beyond. And I loved your hashtag.
Everyone will know it was God.
That's what every post, right?
Yep. Everyone will know it was God. And I will tell you, through that 43 days, I say this accident happened to Jameer, but it happened for me because it stretched my faith in ways that I will never understand. And there was no one else to believe in. There was nothing else to hold on to but God.
The doctors weren't really giving you a lot of
positive anything. Yeah. Everything was after every surgery, it would say, but he's not out of the woods yet. But he's not going to walk again. But he won't be able to talk. But you're going to have to feed him and shower him. And he's not going to be the same kid. And that's what they would tell me. And I couldn't believe what they would tell me. I just couldn't. I believed that the Lord was going to give me back my son the same way he entered in that car accident. And that was my belief.
Do you have a little insight of what perhaps Abraham and Sarah, knowing about it, felt when he laid Isaac on that altar?
Oh my gosh. I thought about that a couple weeks ago because I'm like, man, they had to really trust the Lord because it's completely out of your control. You have no control. This is the son that I birthed, right?
Yeah.
And I have, up until that point, been a top dog helicopter mom. I would not even let my son go to the corner store by himself. And now, just when I start letting him go a little bit and allow him to get into this car to go to work, this is what happens. I had to trust the Lord.
I love, too, the fact that Abraham, it did not make any logical sense. He thought he was going to get his son back. Mm-hmm. And that's what I hear you saying, too. This was not based on logic.
No.
This was based on your faith in what God could do.
Because logically, I should not have my son today. Based on the doctor's reports, based on how he came into that emergency room, based on what happened in the accident, the way his body, I should not have him. He shouldn't be here today at all. He should not be walking on his own. He should not be talking. He should not be eating by himself, but he is. Wow. And it was nobody but God. And I will tell you, those doctors looked me in my face and they thought I was crazy. A lot of days. Shannon, when I tell you, every time they would call me because they would have to get permission to give him the anesthesia to go into surgery. And so this would be happening multiple times a day that he would go into surgery, come out and have to go back into another one. And they would call me and every single time I would say to the anesthesiologist, care for him as if he was your son. Mm-hmm. And they would say, well, we can't make any promises. I said, I'm not asking you to. God's already made the promise. Mm-hmm. Every single time we would go through this. And I remember one time in particular, I had gotten a call about 1:30 in the morning, and they said, he has an infection. We need to rush him into surgery. And we are letting you know that he's going to need a colostomy bag. We're going to have to remove parts of his intestines. He's going to need the colostomy bag. We need your approval to do this. And I said to the doctor, I said, no, he's not going to need a colostomy bag. And she's like, yes, he is. And I said, no, he's not. And she said, well, I'm telling you that when we remove this part of the intestine, this is what happens. I said, but that's not going to happen for him. And she said, she's like, well, I don't know what to tell you. Like, she didn't know what to say. And so she hangs up the phone. So the doctor had called first, but I hadn't given permission yet to the anesthesiologist. So I'm waiting for the anesthesiologist to call so I can get permission, because then I know he's officially going into surgery. So I'm sitting there, Shannon, waiting for the anesthesiologist to call. But at the time, the Lord started dealing with me on unforgiveness. And he said, if you want me to do this for you, I need you to forgive his father, my son's father. And I'm like, this ain't the Lord, because these two things have nothing to do with each other. And my aunt called me from North Carolina, and she just said, I don't want you to say anything. And she just started reading scriptures to me. For 45 minutes, we're just reading scriptures. And I'm waiting for the anesthesiologist to call, and they never call. And so by the time she was done with the scriptures, I had said, all right, God, I will do it. And so I called his father at this time, it's probably 2:30 in the morning. And I just said, I forgive you. I forgive you for everything. And he's not into the church or anything. So he was kind of like, I don't know what you're talking about, but okay. And so I hung up that call, and I got my phone rang, and it was the doctor. And she said, okay, he's out of surgery. And I said, how's he out of surgery? I didn't give permission to the anesthesiologist yet. She said, oh, well, he's out of surgery, and he doesn't have a colostomy bag. She said, I don't know what happened, but when we got in there, the infection was gone. We didn't have to cut any of his intestines.
Wow.
That was no one but the Lord.
Right.
No one but the Lord. And so those type of things kept happening through this whole situation.
And I love the fact that you documented every step of the way. Like, you let us be part of that process with you. And honestly, Sana, when I would read your posts, I was like, oh Lord, I hope she's not going to be disappointed. Honestly, like I wanted to have faith with you, and I was praying for him, and I was praying that, but I was like, there's a lot stacked up against this kid.
It didn't look good.
It did not, from where I'm sitting in Michigan, it didn't look good. Mm-mm. And I just love that God gave you that faith. I love your hashtag, because I think God is really all about his name, that the whole world would know that he is the faithful one.
Yes.
And I think it honors him when we live like that's true. That's what I see in your story.
Shannon, me sharing it literally went viral. There were people from all over the country that was following the story and watching what the Lord was doing. And what kept me encouraged was I would get messages from parents saying, my son or my daughter never believed in God. We don't pray in our house, but now they're asking to pray for your son. And
amazing.
That for me was like, God, this ain't just about you doing it for Jameer or about you doing it for me. This is about you doing it for them. Yeah. They need to see a miracle. And the Lord did it. I mean, he did it in such a way that is like, there's no medical explanation. It baffled the doctors. I mean, the doctors came in the room. When he woke up, they came in the room and they were like, there's no way he should still be here. Like, literally, I had doctors who were not even his doctor coming in just to lay eyes on this miracle.
What are you waiting on God for? And which promises of God apply to you during this long stretch of waiting? My free Pray God's Promises prayer guide will help you sort out which promises are for here and now and which ones apply to you later. When you pray the promises found in your Bible, this is one of the ways that God shapes you by his promises. For your free prayer guide, use the link in the show notes or go to shannonpopkin.com/promises, where you can also learn more about my brand new Bible study with Our Daily Bread titled Shaped by God's Promises, Lessons from Sarah on Fear and Faith. Didn't you say something about they read his chart or whatever? And
yes, so they read his chart. So he wakes up. It was very interesting because now I have no medical background. Up until this point, I didn't have a college degree. All I had was a GED, right? Because I dropped out of high school. So I have no medical background. But the Lord has started telling me, tell the doctors to wean him off the meds. Now, I don't know what these meds are. I don't know nothing about them. So I'm telling them, wean him off. They're like, we can't. If we do that, he could die. No, he won't. The Lord said to wean him off. So they began to do what I said against their better judgment. So they weaned him off and he came out of the coma. So he wakes up and he knows who he is. And he's not able to talk yet because he's still on the ventilator, but he's able to write. And so they're like, this is not happening. So we end up, after he woke up on day 40, day 43, we were leaving the hospital and going to rehab.
Yeah.
3 days.
That's amazing.
So we get to the rehab facility and they have him on this medically compromised unit. So on the unit, it's like a lot of older people who are like really medically compromised. So in comes my son. The doctor comes in and he's looking at my son. He's looking at the chart and he's looking at Jameer. He's looking at the chart and he's like, this is not who we're looking at is not who we're reading in this chart.
That's amazing.
Are you sure? And I'm like, I'm quite sure this is my son. And they're like, there's no way. He should not be alive right now. We expected somebody that was going to come here that was totally out of it. And yet he's here. Like he started eating food the next day. It was just so many things that the Lord did. I look back on it now and I chuckle because people the doctors were literally baffled. They couldn't believe it.
That is our God. # only God. That's the one that's the one I always use, but I love yours that the world, what is it? #
everyone will know it was God.
Everyone will know it was God.
Yep. And then I started saying, when we left the hospital, I started hashtagging, watch him work. Because they said he won't ever walk. He won't ever talk. He won't ever this. Watch him work. 18 days in that rehab facility and my son was home. Walking,
unbelievable.
Talking,
I remember watching that too, on watching him come home. So catch us up. How is he now?
Oh, he's so good. So he came home the end of August of 2021.
Okay.
And I did not want him to fall into a depression because he came home and now I had to sit him down and tell him that he survived that car accident, but his friend who was driving the vehicle did not survive the car accident. My husband and I made the decision to not share that with him until he was home where we could really, help him. We didn't want him to regress medically. So he came home and I had to tell him that I didn't want him to fall into a depression. And so as a mom, all I knew to do was to push him. And so he came home August 18th of 2021 and he went back to work 30 days after that. At the time, before he went before the accident, he had 2 jobs. He worked at a school system during the day, and then in the evening, he worked at Home Depot. So I reached out to the school and I said, listen, can he have his job back? And they were like, absolutely. And so, they had to make a couple of changes and stuff to what his responsibilities were because, he's still healing and things. But he went back to work and it was the job and being around those kids that I think really, really helped him to not fall into that depression. He was very scared. He's been athletic, played football his entire life. Yeah. And now, because he didn't know this new body that he was in, that, they had to literally rebuild it, he was scared to jump. And so he would move very slowly, very cautiously because he just was scared. But the kids would be like, Mr. Jameer, can you play basketball with us? Can you do relay races? And before you knew it, he was back out there doing those things with the kids. And
Okay.
so yeah, so he's so good now. He's back at work, full time, and you would never know that he
Wow.
was ever in the car accident. He doesn't have any memory of the car accident, doesn't remember anything like that. And he takes, a couple minutes sometimes to kind of process if you're talking to him just a little bit. You wouldn't really know it if you didn't know that he was in a car accident, but that's a part of the brain injury. But other than that, he's great.
Mm. And how is he doing spiritually? How is his faith journey?
He's getting better. In the beginning, he was questioning God a lot.
Sure.
Why did you take my friend, but you didn't take me? He was very angry. He didn't understand it. He's still a young man,
Yeah.
but he keeps saying, God did the impossible.
Yeah.
God
He
did the
did.
impossible.
He's your Isaac. I mean,
Yeah.
God gave him back. And you know what? Isaac, it took him a bit. He had to live his own story of
Mhm.
following God and growing in faith. So each of us have that opportunity to
Yeah.
either walk by faith or walk by fear. And I am so proud of you.
Thank you.
I'm amazed at what God has done, but I'm amazed at your faith-filled response. In Sarah's story, we talk about like leaving and cleaving, like only clinging to God and
Yeah.
going without knowing, like taking the next step and not knowing what's going to
What's
be
coming?
there, how
Right.
God is going to work, and being in an out of control situation and choosing to put your faith in the one this story, it is about him. Whether or not we see it, we're in a
Right.
story that is all about God, and
It's all about God.
you see it. Like
Yeah.
you see it. And I just love the way you are pointing us to him.
Thank
So
you. I
thank you.
appreciate it. I think what's important, and if I could leave one gift with your listeners, it would certainly be that even in these different struggles and trials that we find ourselves in, it's very important how you manage it. It's important that when you're suffering well,
Mm,
because you are still a representation of Christ, even in the season of suffering.
yeah.
And so while it's hurting you and you're going through these things, you still want to make sure that the hand of the Lord is seen
Mm,
through it all. And for me, I never want to misrepresent who God is. I
right.
never want to do that. And I want to make sure that people get to know him in the fullness of who he is, because there's so much goodness in
Mm.
serving God.
I just want to ask one more question before we close. There are listeners who didn't get their son back,
Mhm.
who didn't God didn't answer the prayer in the way that they hoped. They're still in a situation where it feels unsafe. Whatever. They're in the middle of the parentheses and they haven't gotten what they hoped for, what they prayed for. How has God's promises that point to eternity beyond this life, how has that anchored you?
You know, um, I have my grandmother is 103. She just turned 103 a few weeks ago.
And does she look like
And
she's about 50? Is that where you get this
She
eternal?
she she looks amazing. But every
Oh,
time we go to visit her, or you call her on the phone and you say, "How you doing, grandma?" She'll say, "I'm just waiting for the Lord to take me on home.
mm,
I can't wait for the Lord to take me on home."
mm,
And she always has said to us, what is to come is so much better than what is.
mm,
And I think that is the part that I would love for people to understand, because, you know, in this story of this miracle story of my son, there is another family who did not get their son back,
yeah.
whose son did go on to eternity.
Mhm,
And my hope for them is that they realize where he is way better than where we are.
mhm,
Who he is with, the being in that presence is way better than where we are.
mm,
And I often ask myself, if it would have been the other way around, if
mhm,
Jameer would have been the one that did not make it out of that accident, Sana, would you still serve God?
mm,
And The answer would be absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because there's still work to be done.
Mm.
There's still work to be done. And it might be easier said than done because that's not how my story ended. But I know with all my heart that I would still serve God. It may have been a delay.
Yeah.
But it would not have been a hard stop.
There's that time of processing between those parentheses, right? But I love the fact that Hebrews tells us that Abraham and Sarah lived in a tent, because tents are temporary.
Yes.
You don't set up a tent for permanent. They're movable. They're just for now. And the text says that they looked forward to that city that has the foundations. Like they lived their whole lives never getting many of the promises.
Right.
They never got to see them come true.
Yep.
And yet their life was anchored not in what they could see, not in what they could feel under their feet. It was anchored in a city. But I think sometimes we confuse the spiritual and the eternal with something that's not real. Like we think of like there's the here and now, and then there's the eternal. And we forget that heaven, it is a city, and there's going to be street under your feet. There's going to be trees overhead. There's going to be fruit to eat. We're going to have these new bodies.
Yes.
And it's going to be forever.
Yes.
And so whatever we endure in this moment, if we are faithful to him, he will be faithful to us. And I said that wrong, because he will be faithful to us regardless of whether we are faithful to him.
Exactly.
He invites us to live like these promises that he's made are going to come true. And so thank you for being one of the ones who's done that, who is doing that. You inspire such faith in me. And I can't wait to see what's going to be next, in your story. But most of all, I can't wait to walk on those streets with you, Sana, and rejoice that everyone will know.
Everyone will know it was God.
It was God. It was him. Can I just remind you that each of these stories from the Bible is absolutely true? Rather than giving us a list of facts to memorize about himself, God gave us a book filled with stories. And each one helps us to know him and to understand this overarching story that we are all in. So I hope that you'll take some time looking at this story in your Bible. To help you study, I've put together my free Live Like It's True workbook, which includes my false narratives watch list, my story elements bookmark, and more. Live Like It's True is part of the Resound podcast network. For more gospel-centered resources, visit resoundmedia.cc. We've got that link for you, along with links to any of the other resources that we've mentioned in the show notes. Thanks so much for joining me. And now it's time to go live like it's true.